Welcome to West of Tulsa. I'm CJ Ward. We are broadcasting from Ventura, California. We got Dan at the controls.
As usual.
As usual. Gabe is here. Mm-hmm. The other thing that's as usual is we don't have Beth or Helm here. We've done a lot of shows without Helm and Beth.
We have, yeah.
Yes. And they are coming back.
They are still part of West of Tulsa, and they are coming back.
Yes,
for sure.
Yes, they are. All right, so I guess simply put, we're going to get artistic on your ass today. How's that?
That's
one way to put it, yeah.
Okay. On West of Tulsa, we're going to get artistic on your ass because we got Peter Kappen here with us. One day, was it maybe a couple weeks ago, we were sitting there, we just finished taping one of the shows with Alma and Orwin Middleton, and all of a sudden I look out the door and I see this guy going like this. And he's like waving his arms. And I'm like, I wonder who that is. It was Peter. And he has a shop right down the street from us. So you're a neighbor.
Yes, sir.
And what he started is just so cool. Tell it. What's the name of your business, and what are you doing right now?
Yeah, well, thank you guys so much for having me. I'm stoked to be here on this show. You guys are so cool, and like I said, I keep meeting all these cool people that are all associated with you.
And everybody's close by.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. You guys seem to be like the nucleus. Everything's like rotating around you, which is awesome.
I like the way he describes that.
I like it.
Or the sun, maybe.
Right.
We have
our new marketing director.
Yeah, there we
love
go. But yeah, so I just, I guess, like in June, opened the doors to my studio called Visualize Ventura. And I'm a block from here. And my goal of Visualize Ventura broadly is to keep brands and creatives here in the county working, as opposed to having to go down to LA and rent space and shoot the things that they're shooting. So
and photography based, right? So talk about. I mean, I saw. Was it Saturday? It was last Saturday, wasn't it?
Yes, it was. Yeah, it was Saturday. Uh-huh.
Yeah. It's amazing what you've done with that space in there. Yeah. So talk about how you set it up for photography. So people can come in and shoot a car. They can shoot themselves. They can shoot a product. Talk about
so
that.
the goal, like I said, was to kind of house all creative or production needs in under one roof. So I have had this idea of opening a studio for many years. A couple years ago, I actually wrote up the whole business plan and decided that I wanted to kind of market test the idea. So I invited like 20 different photographers, art directors, that sort of thing, to have lunch with me, and just sat down and said, hey, if I opened a business like this in Ventura, first of all, what do you think? Do you think it's a good idea? And by and large, everyone said, yeah, totally. Ventura really needs this. And then secondly, like, if I had this space, how would you want me to build it out? So at that point, like 2 years ago, I started developing this large like spreadsheet of all the things that people would kind of want. And so now, a couple of years later, I have this space. That's essentially what I'm building. I'm building this thing that was kind of told, well, like I said, all the people in the community that needed a space like this told me what they wanted, and that's essentially what I'm trying to accomplish. So I've been a photographer for, 15, 16 years or something like that. Have done lots of different sorts of photography. Studio photography has not actually been my main sort of gig for almost any of my career. I've been primarily a people photographer. I photographed weddings for a long time. But I've started to get more into the commercial space over the last 5 or 6 years, and I was just constantly having to drive to LA. Just had to drive down there for, if I want to shoot an interview, I want to shoot, a food shoot or fashion or whatever it may be. I was constantly faced with this problem that there was nowhere to do it locally. And, I live in Ventura for a reason. I used to live in LA and I was over it, so I wanted to have a space here to do it. So that's essentially what I've created here at Visualize Ventura. And we have like over 6,000 square feet. And as you said, I'm set up for all sorts of production. So I have one room that is kind of dedicated to like headshots and portraiture, and there's also going to be this whole area that I build out for like tabletop photography. I've done a lot of like food photography and shot for products and other things of that nature, so that's going to be that kind of area. I have like the spot to shoot cars, which I essentially built for myself, because that's what I'm kind of focusing on right now, is fine art, automotive imagery. But that's basically like it's like a 3,000 square foot blacked out space, and I have like 25-foot tall blackout curtains, and I have like my skylights blacked out and everything. So I basically have complete control over the light, which is what I need to kind of do the style of photography I do. I have another area that is it has a psych wall. You guys, Gabe, you know what a psych wall is. Mm-hmm. People think it's like psych as in like
psycho.
Yeah, exactly. But no, but the word
CYC.
Yeah, but CYC, and you probably know, but it's short for cyclorama, which is can also refer to like the cycling arena that like in the Olympics when they're like on a curve or velodrome sort of thing. So it's that idea. Basically, it's like an infinity edge white backdrop, which there's a lot of benefits to it, but one of the biggest benefits to a wall like that is really an efficiency thing. So like if I'm shooting for a catalog or a fashion brand or whatever, I can have a model and I can shoot them, and like all the post work of having to cut them and put them on white or that sort of thing is all just kind of done for you. So yeah, there's that area, and then I'm actually still in the process of building a 50-foot cyc wall, which I will use to photograph cars and will be available also for rent. And then there's I was just talking to these guys. There might be a spot for doing podcasts. There might be I think I might have an area in the back that I'm going to have set up to have sets, so I can have like 2 walled sets, to have like a living room setup or a bedroom setup or all these sorts of different things to help various different production needs. So I don't know if I rambled on too much there.
No,
CJ,
no,
but
no,
that's-
no.
I mean,
That
that's
sets it up.
your story is my story too, because I mean, I grew up in LA, lived in LA, worked in the entertainment industry forever, and then moved to Ventura. Then realized I had to go back down to LA all the time to do our work. Dan can relate. Dan had to do the same thing doing with his production company based in Camarillo. He has to go down to LA to do these shoots. We've been down to the same studios, LA Center Studios for me, Quixote for whatever, but I had to do the same thing too. And then I just kind of settled in Ventura, and I was like, man, I started my own studio. I wasn't open to the public, but then I was like, this is too much work. I don't want to do this. So for photography, I actually had to go down to Orange County. I went past LA to go do that. So it's awesome to see somebody like yourself doing that here, not just for the car community, just for the art community, because having these resources is really, really good to have for up and coming photographers, videographers, podcasters, and people that want to promote their businesses and not, get their Amazon, eBay photo studio and take a picture with their phone. No offense if you do that. It does have its purpose, but sometimes you need something a little bit better for you.
Well, no, I've seen Peter at work, so it was eye-opening to be in your shop on Saturday.
Well, I was so happy to have you there.
Yeah,
CJ. It was awesome.
And not only were you taking photos of one of my favorite cars of all time, the 1963 Ferrari Lusso, owned by the Middletons, which we featured here on the show, and the story
Amazing
behind
car.
it.
Yes, an
amazing car. But then it was fun to see it up there in the spotlight and see how you worked the light and the angles, and I was having a blast. That was
thanks,
so
CJ.
much fun.
It was a blast. So
plus you play really cool music.
I actually,
music was great.
That's the key, right? To success.
Music. Yeah. I come from a musical background, so it's important for me to set the stage properly for my creative juices to flow, so to speak. So yeah. I think we were listening. Do you remember what we were listening to? I honestly don't
it
remember.
was all genres. I mean, it was 60s and 70s, a little bit of 80s. It was mixed up. I mean, it's the music I love, and you were playing it. And
I think we have to shout out Spotify for their
Is that who that was?
Shuffle. No, I mean, I think if I remember correctly, I think I turned on like the band or like Crosby, Stills, Nash and
that
Young.
sounds right.
But then when the album's done, it just like plays a bunch of random stuff. And it actually, I've found certain bands, if you choose them, that it will like draw a better variety, and like for instance like the band, because they backed so many other great musicians that I think that are associated with them. So if you just like play them, then it'll start shuffling all the other people that the band backed, which is all these great
that's
musicians.
good to know.
Yeah,
All right.
well, like Dylan and all these other people like that.
The
So,
algorithm
anyway.
knows, man.
It
The
knows,
algorithm
man.
knows.
That's
know.
right. That's right.
So talk about one of the things that I thought was super, super interesting about your process when you were shooting the Ferrari was how the angles you set up and how you were. A good example, I think, is at one point I looked at the car and I said, "Wow, that looks beautiful." I'm looking at your computer screen, and then you go, "Okay, but you see what's missing in the front?" I'm like, Well, you couldn't see the prancing horse.
Yes.
And so you just did a little thing with your app and the light set up, and boom, all of a sudden the prancing horse lights up.
It's like CJ saw a magic
And
trick.
I'm like, wow, that's
It
so
is
cool.
magic. It is magic.
But it's the way he layers it over everything
course,
else that
of
you.
course.
So talk about that a little bit, because it's not a matter of just going up and going click.
Yeah, no, it's a lot more than that. And by the way, so I guess I should say, so my photography style is not my own, I guess I would say. I learned under a photographer named Michael Furman. So he's like in his 70s, he lives in Philadelphia, and he's been shooting the world's, the best cars in the world for the last 50 years. So for instance, he shot the whole Mullen Museum. There's a book that he produced on the Mullen Museum, which unfortunately is, defunct now, but he shot the entire GM Heritage Collection, the whole Motorama, all those cars, the Motorama collection. Yep. He shot all those cars, all the concept cars, all that stuff. He shot Ralph Lauren's, all of his cars, all, so the most significant cars in the world. So if you win Best of Show at Pebble, one of the things you win is a photo shoot with him. So he shot all the winners of Pebble forever.
Wow.
And he's just an amazing guy and an amazing artist, and he's been doing this for a very long time. But his style is very well, it's just kind of his own, and no one else has really ever done it. And and there's a few things I would say that are kind of hallmarks of his style, which one is shooting in the dark, which some people shoot in the dark. But I would say the vast majority of car photography is all done on white. So like my white cyc wall is really, building that is more of a bid to shoot for a broader audience because that's what's expected. But I would argue that putting it in the black really elevates it. It's much more of a fine art sort of approach than you would see than cars are usually shot. And I remember when I first started shooting this, my wife was like, man, it almost looks like the way you'd light something in a museum or something. Like cars you don't usually see cars presented in that way. So there's the shooting in the black. There's really technical kind of details that are hallmarks of his style. Like he shoots with very long lenses. The cars are elevated off the ground, as you saw, which we hadn't necessarily discussed this yet.
Yep.
But yeah, so I had a custom platform fabricated that's a turntable that I put the cars up on, and it's like 18 inches off the ground. But that means that I can get all these shots that you could never get of a car if it was actually sitting on the ground. I actually shoot from below ground level. So the cars, when I shoot them, they have this presence to them that you would never see. Because when you see a car, usually, however tall you are, you're 5-6 feet off the ground. That's the angle that you see it from. But as a photographer, my goal or my job, so to speak, is to show you something in a way that you've never seen it. That's like you being the viewer. And so those are some of the hallmarks of his style. And obviously using a very large light source. And then there's a lot of nuances that go into that. But I remember last year, I actually only met him last July. And he had a studio set up in Santa Paula. And I remember I walked into this room where it was set up, and for the first time I like walked in. He had his like a black tent sort of thing to block out all the light. I walked in and there was a 250 Zagato on the platform. I think in last year it sold at Pebble for $16.5 million. And the thing was, I mean, unbelievable. And it it had been campaigned a ton, raced really famously. There's all these old historic photos of it. But I remember I walked in and saw it lit on the platform for the first time, and I was hooked. Like that was the first. Like I saw it and I was like, you can do this? Like this is. I didn't know you could light a car like this. And it honestly blew my mind, and it made such an impression on me. And I've never interned or worked for any sort of photographer, but I basically met him. We started talking. He realized that I was a photographer and had a lot of experience shooting cars and other things. So he's like, well, hey, I have another shoot coming up in a couple of weeks. If you want to come hang out and just like, if you want to help out or whatever. I was like, yeah, sure. Let's do it. So that kind of led to this working relationship where I started working for him, and then started booking shoots for him and all sorts of things. But that's essentially what kickstarted my kind of creative process. And he also, once again, he's kind of at the end of his career. And I was like, well, would it be cool if I kind of like carried on the torch? And he's like, yeah, go for it. So that's essentially what I'm doing here. Is kind of carrying forward this style that was been developed by Michael Furman for the last 50 years. But he's never trained anyone to do it. And so it's really an honor, and it feels like a huge responsibility to kind of carry this on. So I got way out of probably your question.
No.
But,
That was
that's
awesome.
cool, because I love the continuing the legacy. We hear so many stories from previous guests of how people are not picking up the legacy.
Totally.
Whether because they don't want the person with the trade doesn't want to give it up, or there's people that are not interested in picking up that trade.
Well, I think that's the reality of the situation that I'm in. It's maybe people are interested, but CJ got to see kind of firsthand. It's not. It's no walk in the park like to shoot cars like this. There's a serious investment when it comes to just a monetary investment in getting the things that you need. But there's you have to force yourself to be able to see things in a way that people don't usually see them. And I think I have maybe a leg up on the competition because that's what I've been doing for the last, my entire adult life is photographing lots of different genres. And actually, Gabe and I had this conversation earlier where he's like, oh, I don't shoot cars or you said aircraft or anything like that, and you trust professionals to do that. But like that's the exact opposite of what I've done. I'm like, I don't know anything about this subject, so I'm just going to jump in and photograph it. So I'm not actually traditionally like a car guy. I like cars, I really appreciate them, but I see them much more as objects of design and as kind of like a sculptural or architectural element than than the sum of its parts. And I think a lot of car guys, they tend to see a car as the sum of its parts, and they think like, what's the drivetrain in this thing, or what's all these and to me, not like I'm uninterested in those things. I totally am interested, but I think me having some sort of separation with the subject actually allows me to have basically just kind of an objective perspective that's different from people that are immersed in the car world.
Yeah.
And so I was just telling him, I was like, dude, no, that means you should jump into it. If you don't know anything about it, then you should just jump in. Like, I think I've kind of come to realize that that's actually kind of a power of mine. And I'm kind of trying to lean into that this time.
Yeah.
But what you were saying is like, no one's shooting cars like this anymore. So there's a studio in LA called Thunder Studios. It's down in Long Beach. And they were like the premier automotive studio for a long time. And so I got to tour it a couple months ago. It was really cool. It was an honor to, go check it out. And, but like my 50-foot cyc wall, like they have, 5 of those, and they have 100-foot cyc walls, and they have softbox. I think it's supposed to be the biggest one in the country, but it's like, I don't know, I think it's 50 feet by 15 feet wide. And then they compare that with a 40-foot one. So you could light a train in their studio, like, a locomotive, and it's like that big.
Yeah.
But they were just saying, the guy that I got to hang out with, the studio manager, and he was just saying, yeah, back in the day, like in the 80s, when he started there, he's like, there was lots of car photographers. He's like, now there's no car photographers anymore. No, there's like almost none, especially on the studio side. He was saying, he's like, I feel like you're probably the only guy, like, and I'm in my 30s, and he's like, you're probably the only person of your age probably in the country trying to do what you're doing, is what he said to me. And I hadn't heard anyone say that to me, but now that I am getting deeper into it, I'm starting to realize that, well, first of all, the studio that I have, it's kind of a rare, beast anyway. So not many people have that space. And then to build the infrastructure that I built in order to shoot cars in this specific way is it's kind of like no one's doing it. So it's very kind of uncharted territory, which is exciting. But at the same time, super terrifying, because it's like, people don't know what I do. And once again, to your point, like, you see my images and you're like, oh, that's really beautiful or whatever, but you have no idea
what goes into it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so often people assume that my work is like artificial, AI, like they think it's renderings, which and it actually bothers me, because on the internet now you're like, wow, that's an amazing photo, and you start looking at it like, that's not a photo. But that's a computer, doing whatever. And so I actually, this is an aside, but I bought the website analogintelligence.com. So I own the website, and I was like,
That's
wanted to start.
I love that.
So I wanted to have my tagline to be like made with AI, but that stand for analog intelligence as opposed to artificial intelligence.
Cool. Yeah.
So anyway, I have not acted on that, but I own the URL. If anyone wants to buy it from me, it's going to be very expensive.
We'll put the link in the description.
Exactly. No, but anyway, so it's a very unique thing that I'm trying to do, but it's, like I said, it's very exciting, but I'm kind of at the very early stages. I'm like just kind of jumping into it with both feet and just seeing where it takes me.
No, I think that's the most awesome. I mean, Dan and I, us being, photographers, cinematographers, and, people that just put content together. We look at the photos, the first thing Dan goes, is like, man, that light box, man, and the freaking, the freaking, and I was like, yeah, but I know how long it took him to probably set that shot up. I'm like, I'm not into it. I was like, that's too much. That's too much work. I'm a lazy. That's why I don't shoot cars, because I'm lazy.
Yeah.
But I get it. But I appreciate that stuff. And you're right. I don't know a lot of people that are doing that, right? Except for like, somebody's trying to get the cover of DuPont Registry, which is like one guy in a million or whatever.
Yeah, right.
I mean, the on location guys. I mean, there's a ton of those. There, I would say a dime a dozen. You go to any car show, and there's people with nice cameras shooting.
Yeah.
But the disparity between someone that does that and someone that like pays their mortgage and has a family and is all supported off of this is there's a very big leap. You know what I mean? And so that's the leap that I'm trying to bridge that gap. And so I think that therein lies the kind of, and I was never that guy. I never went to car meets and brought a camera. Like I never was interested in doing that. And when I was presented with the opportunity to really shoot it this elevated way, that's what really hooked me. Because I am a through and through a creative. I come from a musical background, and I have my mom's an art teacher and all these sorts of things. So I'm definitely a creative, but I'm also very technical. So to me, when I can find that like nexus between the technical and the creative, that's when my mind starts to be really engaged, and it's like very exciting to me. And so I think that's why my particular, makeup kind of, I think is naturally kind of inclined towards this sort of work. So when it comes to like details sorts of stuff, like, I get it. It's like tedious. It totally is tedious.
Yeah.
But to me, it's like fun. It's like that. It's like
Yeah.
that, the joy of that pursuit. And it's like, I want the shot to be perfect. And there's all these details that no one's even going to see except for me. And no one's even going to think about them. Because, you saw it like, oh, it looks so good. But I'm like, no, you don't.
You're not looking at that.
No, yeah. And it's an education thing. It's
Yeah.
like, hey, actually look at your eyes here. And so my friend Alex, who was there, he's been on many of my shoots and shot, and so I wanted him there because we've dealt with lots of, very expensive cars. And he's a driving instructor for the LAPD actually. And he's just a great guy. He has like 15 car collection himself, and he's an amazing mechanic and all these sorts of things. But I was just like, hey, would you just come just because, like, if I have any trouble getting the car up on the platform or whatever, like, I'd rather him be there.
Sure.
So that's why he was there. But he's been on so many of these shoots now. He now knows like what to look for. So he'll like call me out. He's like, Peter, like, you gotta, like, aren't you looking at this? And I'm like, oh, you're totally right, Alex. Like, I gotta pay attention to that little detail. So it's fun,
But what I find in your photography, though, which is like most photographers, at least ones that I would deem creative, right? And you're not just shooting a product or whatever, and you have your own signature style. It's like you're seeing it through your eyes. So like, you're right, you weren't a car photographer per se, but you have a vision for the car, treating it like a design piece. And that's, to me, what makes this type of photography that you do. And by the way, if you haven't followed him or checked out his site, you should go check it out, because it's not just the fact that you shoot under a big nice studio and a big light boxes. It's how you're interpreting what you're looking at through the lens, right? And that's, to me, like, I wish Helm was here, because Helm is the same way too. Helm,
he would love it.
Helm is definitely more of a street photographer style, but he loves to tell a story in a picture, right? What like most photographers are supposed to do. And doing that with a car, I think, is a lot more challenging, because there's no facial expression or to give it away the story or whatever. But with a car, the car is going to tell you what it wants to, this is the best feature of the car. This is how I want it to be perceived, right? And it's through your lens, which I think is a very special and unique thing. And it's a trait that's definitely lost. And you have to focus more on that, because you don't have a bunch of scenery painting the picture for you.
Yeah, you can't hide behind anything.
Yeah.
That's for sure. Like,
Lines.
Everything is kind of like out there to be seen.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're totally right.
Yeah, lines. I mean, when I was watching you change the lighting and move the car around a little bit, and you could see the highlights would change and the curves would change, and I was having a blast. In fact, at one point, I was so into it. I'm walking around, I'm taking pictures.
I know. I want to see some of your photos, but you got some good stuff.
Yeah, well, maybe you'll hire me.
Yeah,
CJ texted us pictures while he was watching this photo shoot with you, and I just thought to myself, if I saw CJ taking pictures while I'm taking pictures, I was like, he better not post this and think they're his pictures, with your iPhone, with your own iPhone.
No, I don't feel threatened. It's all good.
As you shouldn't.
At one point, I'm like walking around taking pictures, and all of a sudden, Peter goes, "You're in front of my camera." And I'm like, well, wait a minute. The camera was over there just a second ago. Oh, I moved it over here now, and it's like all the way across the room, way back in a corner. And I'm like, how did he do that?
So how long a lens do you usually typically shoot with?
Well, it kind of depends, but typically I'm shooting at like 85 millimeter above.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
I like to shoot around 100 millimeter, and depending on the shot. I mean, obviously, well, the car is technically the widest at the 3/4 view, because it's this way, but you turn it on a 3/4, then the corners are even longer. So my space, as large as it is actually probably slightly smaller than it should be to shoot cars the way that I want to shoot them. So sometimes you saw there's that other back room. So sometimes I'll move my camera all the way back there, so it goes another 20 feet back, and then I have a full like 80, almost 90 feet shooting from that direction. And then I'll shoot like with a 135 or something like that. But often, like dead front, dead back, I'll generally shoot them longer than the side views. And those are generally shot like around 135. But, most people are shooting cars in the wide angle of the, of the spectrum. So, 35, 50, 50 is not even really considered a wide angle lens, but a 50 millimeter lens, if you have the eyes to see it, it has all sorts of optical distortion. Which you wouldn't, most people are not trained to see those sorts of things. But it totally changes the shape of a car depending on the lens. I mean, you've probably seen the things like where people, like, you shoot someone's face and you start with like a 16 millimeter and you go all the way to 200, and they look super skinny. Then they look like fat and flat, with a 200. So and it does the same thing to a car. And so typically people shoot cars from, angles that you are used to seeing them, like standing up and shooting them, and they generally shoot with wide lenses. So the fact that I'm shooting like at ground level or below with really long lenses just automatically just changes the impact of the image.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Do you shoot medium format or 30 or full frame 35?
So I
or?
have shot medium format digital. At the moment, I'm shooting. I shoot with like a Canon mirrorless camera. But I think I'm going to get back into shooting with.
You're going to answer the question I was going to ask for Helm, because I know this will be the first question. What are you shooting with? Because Helm's all about that. He wants to know what you're shooting with.
Yeah. I mean, I shoot with the Canon R5.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, it's it's kind of Canon's like.
Well, that's one thing that struck me about your images. Even when I was sitting working on something, and CJ sent me those cell images, and I've experienced this myself. It's always like the lighting is 90%. You can literally, if you light something really well, you can point a cell phone at it, and 99% of people can't tell the difference. You can tell the difference. I can tell the difference.
Yes.
Maybe clients if they're picky.
Maybe, or if you printed it large or something like that, then it would then the detail would start to break down. And yes, you're totally right.
But it really is. It's almost funny that people fixate so much on cameras and lenses, and it's like they're all good. It doesn't matter.
Well, so jumping off of that, if you don't mind, so part of my history is I went to UCLA when I was younger. I have a degree in history. I thought, and I really did it because my parents kind of placed this expectation that all their kids were going to go to college, because my parents didn't go to college. So it was cool. So all of us did, and but secretly in my mind the whole time I was like, I want to be a professional guitar player. That's what I wanted to do. And so I thought beyond a shadow of a doubt that like the second I graduated from UCLA, I was going to go on the road. I was going to be like a gun for hire. Like I was going to be a lead guitar player on the road. And when I graduated from school, I was kind of interested in photography. I'd taken one photography class, but I liked it. And my parents asked me what I wanted for a graduation gift, where I was like, oh, I would like a nice camera. So they bought my first camera, and literally like a week later, I met this lady who was a wedding photographer, and that's how I got into starting to shoot. And not long after I booked my first wedding and taught my then girlfriend, who's now been my wife of 14 years, but I taught her how to shoot. And then we went on to shoot over 300 weddings over a decade. And so it was a really cool experience. But what was I saying? I was saying at Apple, we were talking about, oh yeah. So I worked for Apple. And like I remember the day that Instagram came out. I was working for Apple at the time, and so like so it was really fun. And I remember like I worked down. I had an office in the back of the Santa Monica, the 3rd Street Promenade store in Santa Monica, and there was like 250 employees or whatever at that store. And I remember we were all the ones that were up on the apps because we worked for Apple. So we all downloaded it, and everyone's like taking pictures of their coffee or their food or whatever. And like from the get go, I was using it as like an art tool. I was like, I'm gonna use this phone that's in my pocket to like make art. Like that's what I want to do. And so like on all my breaks, I just walk down to the beach and I would just try to take interesting photos. But that kind of led to me kind of constantly training my eyes to see interesting things. But and then later they started doing Apple started doing these shot on the iPhone campaigns. You used to see those like if you went up to San Francisco or whatever, still to this day you see them, these big billboards that shot on the iPhone. People are like, wow, that's an amazing photo or whatever. And I remember just all those years ago, it was like 16 years ago or something, being like, man, I would love to be in an Apple campaign, that'd be so cool. And so I treated my iPhone, and then I working at Apple, I found out that you can't actually get on one of those campaigns. Apple has to find you and reach out to you. You can't reach out to them. So I was like, okay, well, if that's the case, I'm just going to continue to try to just create good content with my iPhone and like really lean into it. So this is a long time ago, and years later, I quit Apple, and many years later, sure enough, I get an email from their media arts lab, which is Apple, and they said, "Hey, we want to license your footage for our one of our campaigns." And so it was such a cool experience. Wow. So I actually ended up being the campaign that my stuff was featured in was called Earth, shot on the iPhone, and it was actually like a political response of Apple, because I think Trump was president and he pulled out of the Paris Climate Agreement. So Apple's like, oh, we don't agree with this or whatever, and so they during the NBA playoffs, they showed this stuff, and my footage was in it, and it was a shot that I had done like at sunrise in Yosemite of this this river all like smoking,
Nice.
as the sun was rising. It was a really cool shot. But like I said, it was a really cool thing to have this validation all these years later of having my iPhone footage in a nationally shown commercial for Apple. And it's funny because I didn't even know it was happening. They didn't even tell me they were going to broadcast it. So all these people texting me, be like, "Is that you? Like, is that you?" So it was a really random thing. But that was a circuitous way of saying that you're 100% right. Like, the tool is the least important thing, and it's all the way that you proceed, the way you shoot, the lighting. And still to this day, I really enjoy shooting with my iPhone because, if you know how to manipulate light and if you know the parameters with which an iPhone like can operate in, because, you start getting into low light or all these sorts of things, it doesn't, or you're shooting directly into the sun. There's things like that you just have to know, like you can't really, it's not going to hold up. And then, so once you get to those situations, then gear kind of starts to matter, So in my situation, like before I really learned the nuances of how to light cars and that sort of thing, I would do the same thing. I'd be like, just snap an iPhone photo, be like, look at how sweet this
look
is.
at that.
Yeah. But then you start to learn, like, oh wait, but there's all these problems, and it could be improved in all these sorts of ways. And that was the thing that was exciting to me about jumping into it. Is like, well, how do I learn all those things? How do I improve and continue to see things that these nuances that other people don't see, and how do I continue to make them better and better and better? So I think that's kind of like the situation I'm on now. So, but that being said, I've been shooting with my iPhone. I got like a gimbal, and I've been shooting like reels because I guess that's what like the kids do. I don't know.
You hear that, Gabe? You hear that?
Starting to sound like Dan and CJ.
Yeah, exactly.
That's what the young whippersnappers
yeah,
do.
exactly. That's what the kids are doing these days. But and once again, Instagram no longer, like, they penalize you if you just post static images, because a static image just psychologically is not nearly as engaging as a moving image. And so if you just post photos, you're not going to be shown to anyone. So I was like, I guess if you can't beat them, join them. So anyway, I'm pulling out my iPhone, shooting these cars in my studio. So
there you go. Well, it's interesting because in my career, I had an opportunity. I worked with Canon, and I shot when they had a new camera coming out, and they had a cinematographer, and they did like a big promo piece on him, and I got to interview the cinematographer. And this guy, I think Russell Carpenter, he's an Oscar winner. He's like, I don't know anything about cameras. And I dug that, man. I was like, that's so cool, because I've interviewed a lot of Oscar-winning cinematographers and directors, and they're usually very technical, and I'm pretty technical, and they talk even way above my head. It's like, whoa, I barely know what you're talking about. And he was very much like, no, that's why you have ACs, right?
Right.
ACs can be the techno nerds, and your lighting, actor, storytelling. I won an Oscar. You can't argue with that. It's like, so it's I have a lot of respect for both. I mean, there's technicians who are brilliant. Ansel Adams was a technician. I mean, he's a storyteller, but he's a technician. But then you have the other side, and I like that, especially for young people today, it's like the tools have never been better, cheaper, more awesome, for almost free. And it's like, it's you. Go tell your story, your visual story, your narrative story, whatever. And it's like, what an amazing time in history we live in. Because for me at least, it was hard. It's like you're starting off with film. When I interviewed Scorsese, it was pretty much, I was telling, he was telling me in his screening room in New York, and he was going, when we first started shooting films like Mean Streets and so on, we'd shoot like 10 rolls and we'd get it back and just hope we had an image.
Right.
This is Scorsese saying that, and he was in film school and stuff. So it's kind of like, we've come a long way, and it's like, look what we have now. We have an iPhone that's like pretty damn brilliant for, $500, $1,000.
Yeah.
And anyone has access to it almost. And it's like, go out and make stuff, That's what it's all about.
Totally. And I would argue the reason people don't now is it's like the world has become so convenient.
Yeah.
And I don't think convenience, it lends itself to good art. You know what I mean?
No,
or to really anything in the world.
Exactly.
I think that we, as a society, and just even in our country in this time and place, we live in a time of excess, and so we have all this stuff and I think that like, you look at tumultuous times in history or in certain societies, like, that's where the good art comes from. That's where the interesting things are happening.
Right.
Yeah. It's kind of when it's being on the fringes, on the edges. And so I think it's interesting because now everyone's got this amazing tool in their pocket, and I think in general, the the level of photography has risen, overarchingly.
for
like you
sure.
look back in the 90s at people like shooting, disposable point and shoots and stuff. Like obviously people are better now by and large. But there's never been so many bad images being produced on a daily basis right now,
Bathroom selfies.
Well,
Exactly, yeah.
Well, and that's the problem too. I was talking to a friend about this, about music, and he was like, "Why don't you get Spotify?" And I'm like, you know what? I still like buying freaking music.
Yeah.
I like paying
Yeah.
$10 and knowing that Debbie, Harry, and Blondie got $6 of that,
Mm-hmm.
rather than I pay $10 a month and I have access to every song ever made.
Mm-hmm.
It makes it valueless. It's worthless, and unfortunately, still images have kind of come the same way. Like yours are brilliant.
Well, thank you.
You make brilliant images, obviously. But in general, there's just so much noise and so much static. And it's that way with video too, really. It's like there's just so much out there. It's like, how do you stand out? How do you have value in your work?
And
right?
I'm curious, has there been a project recently where you've started it and you go, man, the pressure's on. This one I really have to shine on. I really got to get this right. And you just felt the pressure of the shoot.
Yeah. Well, yeah. So a car that I shot just a few weeks ago, which is, I guess I don't have to bring up the controversial nature of this particular vehicle, but it is the Cybertruck. So whatever anyone wants to say about it or wants to, dislike it or whatever, like I don't see any other car company taking the risk like that, the design risk. Whether you think it's good or bad, no one else is putting themselves out there like that. And I would argue those are the sorts of things that push design forward, is the people that are willing to take those risks. Yeah. And I don't think there's any shadow of a doubt, at least in my mind, in 50 years, there's not going to be a moment like, oh my gosh, back in the 2020s, like, oh, that's when that crazy Cybertruck thing came out. But look at how that changed the design language of vehicles. Look at how that, I really feel like that was like a line in the sand that was drawn. Sure. And for a company like Tesla, that's worth more than every other company combined. And for them to put that thing out there and just to see them on the road, I mean, they're so like disorienting when you see them. You're like, what is this? And I personally, I'm like, I love it. Like I'm super into.
I like it too.
Well, and I think like, art, if nobody dislikes it, it's not really art. You know what I mean? Like that's not really, I think that's like probably a pretty good litmus test for any sort of art. Yeah. Like if it's not controversial or polarizing at all, then it's like, well, you're just trying to please everyone. You're just trying to, and once again, it's like, just like I said earlier, like I don't think convenience lends itself to good art. I also don't think the whole public liking what you did is also indicative that you've done something groundbreaking or good or whatever. So all that to be said is I got to shoot the personal truck of the guy who designed the Cybertruck. So his personal truck. Oh, wow. It was chassis number 2.
Is that the guy in Montecito? CJ.
We were talking.
Yeah.
Do you know him?
I don't know him, but I remember we
such
talked
a great
about
guy.
it briefly about it.
Yeah, he's such a great guy. But so I had this amazing opportunity to photograph his personal truck, and it's black, which in talking to him, that's actually how he designed it to be. It's black, and I think in black it really it makes more sense when you see it in black. And it feels very like I was telling him I have like an aeronautic kind of background. I used to fly in high school and other things like that.
Like a stealth bomber kind of.
No, I mean stealth fighter specifically.
Stealth,
no, it's like that's what it feels like in the angles on it. Yeah. And it has such like presence to it. It's like it feels much bigger than it actually is, because I think it's actually technically smaller than like an F-150, but it feels big when you're next to it. And so to answer your question, like, did it feel like I had to get it right? It's like, it's funny because I shot it for like a week and it was in my studio for like a week or more, and it was just sitting up on my platform, and I would walk in the morning and I'd be like, oh, that's a cool angle, I haven't seen that one yet, and I'd set up all my lights and I would shoot it, and it was cool because it allowed me to kind of like all this time to kind of like digest what I'd already done. In my last day, like I had just a few other things I wanted to shoot on it, and I was about to leave my house, and my wife's like, man, like, how do you feel about like delivering these images to the guy who like designed the car itself? And I was like, wow, like I actually hadn't really thought about it till that moment, and it totally messed with me, like got totally in my head. So I went there that day and I was like trying to shoot, and I was like, man, like what's he gonna think, like how's this gonna be received, and I was all worried about it. So I guess that's the answer to your question. I was like, I shot this car for the guy who designed it, and it was like, wow, that feels consequential.
And that could be pressure. I would totally feel the pressure,
which I think he said he liked the images, so I hope
do you shoot the interiors and the undercarriage and the spare tire
so
and like everything?
I typically deliver like 50 images or 60 images of a car. So there's like the main views.
End to end.
Yeah,
Pretty much.
everything. Especially if you start getting into like coach-built cars, like you
Yeah.
start shooting all the badging, you start shooting
Sure.
all of the serial numbers, all of that, because that's the stuff that really matters in those sorts of cars.
Like
you
the
know.
Tesla truck, did you shoot the bed? Like the bed?
It's funny.
open
That's
and
actually the
stuff?
one thing I did not shoot.
Yeah.
And in the bed, mounted on the bed, was his custom boring company flamethrower was mounted in the bed, and then also the sledgehammer that he was the one on the live stream that actually smashed the window.
Oh, wow.
And that sledgehammer was in the back of his Cybertruck, which is so. I think it was a replica of it or whatever. But anyway, it's like so those things were actually mounted in the bed of it, and it was so cool. I mean, I was so floored to shoot that car. It was so fun. It was such a challenge too, because being so angular like that, you know, it's a very different thing. And so just how you know, it was a challenge trying to figure out how I should put the light on it and how to transition the highlights into the shadows and just lots of those sorts of things.
Yeah, you don't have the advantage of like the rounded edges or the fenders.
Well, yeah, that
right?
hides stuff.
To bounce the lights
Yeah,
off
exactly.
of whatever.
Yeah, and you have these big flat reflective surfaces.
Yeah.
So it was a real challenge, and one that I was very excited about. But yeah.
And
Anyway.
you shot that in the black room, right?
Oh yeah, yeah. Mhm.
And
Yeah.
it was black.
Oh yes.
So
Yes.
that's obviously where you've got to get really tricky with the lighting.
Well, yeah. So you're basically dealing in grayscale at that point. So
Yeah.
you're dealing with, you know, basically highlights to shadows, and then the car itself ends up somewhere on that grayscale.
Right.
You know, be it the highlights or the shadows, and so the idea of shooting on black is it's kind of the opposite that most people think. Like when you're shooting on white, you're typically dealing with your highlights down, and that's kind of how you're setting up a car. In my setup, I do the exact opposite, where I build shadow onto the car, and so that's why the floor is painted black. That's why there's black. I spent days blacking out the ceiling, putting black fabric on the ceiling, and all these sorts of things, just to be able to completely control all that stuff. So, but when you build the shadows up from the bottom and then introduce the highlight from the top, it really accentuates all the curves and all the lines of the car. If you have white from the bottom, it washes out all those curves. So it flattens a car to shoot it with a white floor. Mm-hmm. And once again, this is all stuff that in only recent times have I had even the eyes to understand and see. But so yeah, it's that combination of how do you have like the mystery of the darkness, or like dying off into black, while still showing enough of the car to help the viewer understand what's going on in the design, and trying to figure out a way to like kind of merge that all artistically and make it look cool. So anyway,
That was fun to watch.
yeah, well, it was fun to have you there.
I kept thinking I knew Dan would be just
Yeah,
blown away if
I
he-
got to come by and see when
Dan,
you shoot
come
a
by,
car
man. You're
sometime.
welcome anytime.
I will.
Anytime.
I got a question though.
Yeah, let's hear it.
I know car guys / photographers would appreciate this. You bring in a car, possibly an old car.
Yes.
Have you had any drip oil onto your stage?
Oh yeah, definitely. Yeah.
And you don't have a no leaking oil policy? No. Because if you do, then all my cars are out the door.
No. So it's, on the white stages, we tried to like reinvent the wheel. And when I say we, that's my dad and I. My dad's a general contractor, so he helped me build my whole place. And we're still actually building parts of it, but you know, when I started talking about these cyc walls, and he instantly was excited. He's like, "Oh, it's like a challenge. It'd be fun to build one." He never built one or anything.
He did a great job.
Yeah,
the
thank
one
you.
I saw.
Thank you.
Yeah.
No, he did. He
Yeah.
killed it. He did such a good job. And I'm just so thankful. And we were able to use his like crew. So we had like his painters in there. We had his drywall team in there, like working on it, and it was just awesome. But what were we just saying? I just lost my train of thought. I'm sorry.
With the oil.
Yeah, the oil. So
dripping.
we were like, and he's like, so how do we paint this? You know, I was like, oh, you use flat white paint, you know, like no sheen white paint. He's like, that's just going to get destroyed, right? And I was like, yeah. He's like, well, how do we we can't do that. Like, you know, we got to like figure out some other way of doing this. You know what I mean? And so we went down all these rabbit holes of like trying to do all this special like epoxy, like, you know, 2-part that has like a hardener and all these sorts of things, where it's like, oh, maybe I could just mop it, you know, have it really beautiful white. But there's really the problem. You want it super matte. You don't want it to have any
Shine.
sheen to it.
Yeah. Right.
So that's the hard thing with epoxy, and it has like hardeners in it, and it's really strong, but it has a sheen to it. So anyway, we finally, like I said, we went and toured the studio in LA called Thunder Studios. And they got these 100-foot cyc walls and stuff. And they're like, oh, no, we repainted after every single shoot. Every shoot.
That's what I was going to
repaint.
say. Every time I've
Yes.
rented a white cyc,
Yes.
there was like, what color do you want it? I'm like, really?
Yeah.
green, black,
Oh, yeah,
gray,
anything
whatever
you want.
whatever
Yeah.
you want, because we repainted every shoe. That's
Exactly.
why they cost $4,000 a day to rent
exactly.
one. Right?
Yeah, well, there's a lot. There's a lot to it. So,
Yeah.
so to answer your question, like regardless of what happens on the psych wall, like I'm repainting it,
Got it.
after you're gone anyway. So it really doesn't matter. Like I had a food shoot last week, and they got a bunch of stuff on the psych wall, but it didn't really matter because I just repainted it, and it's
Got it.
I have
fresh
a
and
question
clean
for you, which I've
Yes.
always wondered, because I've shot in millions of studios
Yes.
all over LA and New York and so on. Did your dad build your psych, or did you bring in a psych builder?
No, we built it from the ground up.
So how did you decide, like, the geometry of the curve? Is it a perfectly equidistant curve, or is it? Because I've seen a lot of different
it's
ones.
equidistant. Yeah,
Okay.
it's a but then you get a compound curve at the corner,
Right.
where
Right.
where all the curves are meeting. So that's
Exactly.
called in the psych wall. It's called a cove.
Yeah,
so there's
exactly.
so my two psych walls have two coves.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes you have three coves. There's like a guy in LA that has a full room, psych room. He shoots. He's like the biggest photographer for Bring a Trailer.
Mm-hmm.
And he basically just has this room that with a slide up door that's painted white on the inside, and the rest of the room is a psych wall, and then the entire ceiling is a softbox. So you just
Wow.
pull the car into there, and you just think. So it's not his work is good, but obviously he's not moving the bank and doing all the things that I do. But once you get in that room, you can literally walk around the car and it's lit basically perfectly
Right.
from every direction and shoot. So that's a huge just efficiency sort of
Sure.
game. But to answer your question, there's math out there. You can go look it up. And it all comes down to so as you scale the size of the wall up, the curves need to be larger.
Yeah.
Because the whole point is to hide any sort of edge.
The seam, right?
Exactly. So if you have too small of a seam, you'll still see a shadow. It'll
Sure.
fall off
Sure.
into those corners. So I'm forgetting exactly right now what we did, but I think like on my small one, it's like a 36-inch
Mm-hmm.
curve, and I think my big one's going to be like 40, maybe 48 inches or something like that is the curve. I'm forgetting.
And if
exactly
you
what
get
it was.
kids in the studio or even dumb people, you have to say, don't walk on that.
Yes.
Don't walk on that.
Yes.
Don't
my
walk on
my
the
three
cove.
children love to.
Yeah,
CJ in there,
you
so
gotta
CJ
be-
Did you walk on the psych?
Oh, I knew not, because we have it in our studio at the TV station.
Oh, yeah.
You do? Yeah, you just don't go on it. Yeah,
You know
is that like
better,
for the
right.
weather or whatever?
Weather.
Yeah,
It's
And
a weather
you
wall.
project
It's the
on it.
weather wall, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Green
So-
wall, green
yes.
vid wall, or whatever you
Exactly.
want to call it. Chroma wall, or whatever.
Chroma key.
Chroma key,
Yes,
yeah.
exactly. But
So
yes.
no, I did not.
No, but I have I have a little like basket of like little booties you can put on walking in like a high end house.
yeah.
So I have like those. But obviously when the shoot actually happens, like that's when you rent the space, you get to use it, and if you get it dirty, whatever.
Do you paint it yourself?
Yeah.
How long does it take you?
I mean,
I know you can
like
just slap it on. It's not.
well,
like
and I already
painting
have.
your
I
house.
have like 8 coats or 10 coats
Yeah.
of paint, and that's I only just started. Eventually, there'll be 50 coats of paint
Yeah.
on there, But you don't have to repaint this. Generally, people aren't going up the walls, so
True,
it's just like
true. It's the floor.
Yeah, so my
Mainly the
small
floor.
one is like 18 feet wide by 16 feet deep, so it's not that big.
So
of
with
an
the
area.
roller, you can do that in what, an
Yeah,
hour
and
or
I
two?
got this giant roller, so it goes quick.
Cool.
So I mean, I could do it in like under an hour, no problem.
Okay.
At all. Yeah.
So do your studio? Do you rent your studio for other photographers to use, or is it you shoot in your studio?
Yeah,
only?
so honestly, the main purpose of my studio is to rent. That's
Okay.
like the point of it, as an asset for, like I said, the brands that need it and the creatives that need it. That's really the main purpose of Visualize Ventura, my studio. I needed a specific space, I had these needs that I've started to realize were very kind of unique, especially in this area. I basically said I want 80 feet clear distance, 80 by like 35 feet, and then I need 25-foot ceilings. So to find that space is very difficult. Like obviously, if I could have just rented that exact jump, that exact thing, I could have set up my car studio, nothing else, and I could have still been shooting cars, technically. But to get a space like that, I started to realize, oh, well, that's like 3,500 square feet or something like that. But to get a space with that sort of span, I had to go larger to get the opening that I needed. I toured lots of buildings around here, but most buildings like that, they have poles or posts or all sorts of things because of load bearing issues. So the building I'm in is like a classic like concrete tilt up. It's like a Walmart, you know what I mean? But the way that those buildings are constructed allows for large open areas. So I basically built in the center of it is my car photography studio, but that's the blacked out area, but that accesses all the other spaces. So when I'm not shooting, I can pull back all my curtains, and it basically opens up all the other stages to shoot in.
Yeah, it's a cool setup.
Yeah, well, it's pretty fun.
Yeah.
It's definitely in beta stage. We'll see if it works.
Yeah. Oh, get the word out. I mean, I know a lot of the car. I mean, I will say this: if you have a regular just a regular old classic car, nothing special. It'd be kind of fun just to like
Oh, man.
see what it looks like under that.
Oh, man.
Under that kind of lighting.
Yeah,
I mean,
I
I know you see Ferraris and the really expensive cars, but just to see a regular old
All
car.
right, so for all the cheap bastards out there, because I know they're wondering, how much would it cost to get a photo shoot of their car in your studio?
Well, like I said, it kind of depends. Depends. Like if I'm going to do a full shoot, it's not uncommon for me to have 40 hours into a car. So that's like a car where, like, once again, to Dan's question, like I shoot, engine bays, I shoot serial numbers, I shoot all interior details. That shoot is going to be, I charge anywhere from like $2,500 to $4,000 for something like that. That being said, I do shoot, I shoot smaller things where they just want a few shots of their car, or I shoot for auctions, I shoot for all sorts of things. And so I shoot things as low as like $1,000 sometimes to shoot cars, or sometimes people will bring in multiple cars, they only need a few photos of each one of them, so then the cars end up being cheaper in that way. So but yeah, that's kind of what it is. And you just think like to shoot a single car, like just to give you an idea, like maybe people think that's ridiculous or whatever, but to like shoot a single car, I probably have a $300 electric bill for a single car anyway. So like my hard costs to shoot a car are, and then like, I have editors that work for me. I have all sorts of things. So it's like, just because I'm the one person, there's actually a whole ecosystem kind of supporting the whole thing.
Well, plus you got the lease on the building, which I'm sure is not cheap.
Yeah.
You're telling me, Dan.
Yeah.
I thought it was cool. The photographer who was there when I was there on Saturday.
Yes.
Who was that? What's his name again?
Oh, my friend Quanti is his name.
Yeah, Quanti. So you two, you had an interesting story because you guys kind of reconnected.
Well,
you
we
both
worked at Apple
together. Yeah.
Yeah, we worked at Apple.
Tell
yes.
that a little bit, because I think it's funny how you guys have kind of reconnected over this.
Yeah, he was just someone I met when I was in Santa Monica, and we connected because he was a musician. I think at the time he wasn't a photographer. I was just getting into my photography career. And yeah, like I think over the years, and then he worked for Apple for many years, and he moved to Sweden. So he was in Sweden for like 8 years or something like that. And he worked for, I think it was a nonprofit that Apple ran. I won't speak to that because I don't remember exactly what it was, but that's what he was doing over there. And, just because of the weirdness of our modern day where like I could not talk to someone for 10 years, but there's this weird social media thing where I like kind of know what they're doing, which is weird, like, I don't know. I feel like it's unnatural, but regardless.
Like stalking them digitally?
Well, no, like I'm not, you're scrolling through, like I never go on Facebook. If I go on Facebook now, like I've been on it for 10 years or whatever, but you go on, you're like, wow, this person that I knew in elementary school, like, oh, they're like, whatever they're doing, like their dog died or whatever, and you're like, it's just, I don't know. It's a weird thing for us to be so like kind of connected to people, like, but we're not really. Like I have nothing to talk to, with that, like we have nothing in common anymore. Yeah. So anyway, all that to be said, I kind of was aware that he was like, living in Sweden and all these sorts of things. But then, yeah, like sometime last year, I just walked out of a restaurant on Main Street and he was standing there. And I was like, what's up, man? Like that, how crazy, And so, yeah, we reconnected. We've hung out ever since then. And he actually has a small studio in the harbor that he basically just like a portraiture studio. And so yeah, and he's a great guy. And yeah, that was, and so he came. So if I don't know if I told you this, but that car, the reason I tried so hard to get that car is because I'm running like an editorial in the 805 Living magazine, and I wanted a behind the scenes shot of me shooting a car. I didn't want it to just have like my finished photos, because once again, it's hard. You see it and there's no context. You have no idea what it took to make that image. So in thinking about this, it's like it'd be cool to like have a car, have a picture of me in my studio to kind of, give the viewer an idea of what I would be doing if they brought their car in or whatever.
You're working your butt off for these photos. That's what you
exactly,
wanted.
CJ.
Yes.
So and in my mind, I was like, well, and my brother, who's a designer, he built my website for me. He lives up in Goleta, and he's like, man, you should get like a red car. And I was like, okay, like, so it should be red. It'd be cool if it was like a significant car, like that would be cool. And so then all that stuff combined, I was calling all these different people, but I needed it like in a couple days. And I was like, oh man, Alma and Orwin, like I should call them. Like they have that unbelievable car. So that's how that whole thing happened.
That's
so
awesome.
And so that's why he was there. Quanti was there photographing me to be in this in the magazine.
For the 805.
Exactly.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah. So anyway.
Yeah, it was fun how it all came together, and it was fun to hear the story of you guys kind of reconnecting.
Yeah. So, and I guess I will say that you guys didn't ask this question. My studio is not just set up as a photography studio. It's actually set up almost the other way around. It's actually set up for video. So all the lights, I do have strobe setups, but everything's hot lights. So it's all set up because that's actually, so I got into doing motion like 6 years ago. And that's actually a really interesting story. I don't know how much time we have here, but if you're interested, that's a cool local Ventura car story that I wouldn't mind telling you about. But I basically got into doing motion like, I don't know. It was actually in 2020 is when that happened. I bought my first like video setup and started kind of going into that's how I got into automotive stuff. But all that to be said, it's 2024. Like, as we talked about, photography is probably like, the still image is a thing of the past. So everything is moving now. So my light bank and everything is set up to shoot video of cars too.
Oh, okay.
And so that's something I want to kind of expand into as time goes on. But yeah, so anyway, that's what I wanted to say. So it's not just a photography studio. It's definitely set up for all sorts of video kind of needs and stuff as well.
Dan's probably salivating now.
I know, exactly.
Let's go over and shoot some sexy cars.
Come over, man.
Yeah,
We'll shoot whatever.
Sounds good.
Oh, you'll be over there in a half hour.
Yeah, well, yeah. Come on over.
We'll be done here in
Bring
about
all the
15
black
minutes.
magics over. Let's shoot something.
I gotta be. So it's funny. I have a Blackmagic like 6K setup.
Yeah, great camera.
Yeah, it's
awesome
great.
camera.
Yeah, it's a fun.
Don't drop it.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, so if you don't mind, real quick, I did not do motion at all. I was a photographer through and through. My wife and I, we had a wedding photography business. Like I said, we shot over 300 weddings. It was an amazing experience. But then we started having kids, and our business had expanded. So we never really shot here. We'd always travel to shoot. So whether it was, so like pretty much the closest we would shoot was generally like Orange County, or San Francisco was close for us at that time. We lived here, but we'd often be shooting other states. We'd fly internationally and shoot weddings, and it was a really cool thing. But it was very much like a lifestyle sort of business. So we shoot a wedding in Indonesia or whatever, so we'd stay there for a week and just have a blast. And,
Wow.
Or like we renovated a 1978 Toyota Chinook, which was I actually bought like at the Canadian border and drove down, and we redid the whole thing. And so we would shoot weddings all through the Southwest. So we'd be gone for like 3 weeks in this thing. We'd go shoot like 5 weddings, like in Texas and other places. And so it was a really fun like experience. But like I said, I remember we found out we were pregnant. My wife's pregnant with our first kid, and I remember the next inquiry I got for wedding was in Paris, and it was like, and he was gonna be a newborn at that point. I was like, well, we're not doing that. There's no way. We actually took him to Mexico City when he was 6 months old to shoot a wedding, and it was like a crazy experience. And but I was like, this is not sustainable. And like weddings are fun or whatever, like they're cool, but like I always enjoy being there with my wife, because for the most part I'm with like 200 strangers. Like depending on the wedding, there's a bunch of 200 drunk strangers. And it's like, this is not like, this isn't. It suddenly like loses its luster. It's not like it's that fun. I mean, it's a job. And doing it with my wife and my my best friend, it was really cool. Like we really enjoyed it, and we would use it as a vehicle to do the other things that we like to do. But I started having kids, and it was like, man, this isn't really sustainable. I could be a solo wedding photographer, but I don't really have any interest in doing that. So I was trying to find myself, like kind of figure out like what's going to be my new like focus. And so I actually thought maybe I was done with photography. So I just kind of stopped shooting and stopped like responding to inquiries and stuff, which is like in hindsight, I was like, that was a really stupid thing to do, but that's just kind of what happened. I actually took a job at a marketing agency downtown, a company that my friend owns. And I was like the head sales guy for a marketing agency for like a year, and didn't really shoot. But a year later, this is the end of 2019, I found myself, I got laid off just kind of like suddenly. And it was like, well, what am I going to do? And like, I haven't been shooting. I haven't been, kind of trying to develop my business. So I basically spun up a bunch of work right away with my camera again. I was like, I'm going to jump back into this. And then, COVID happened, and every single thing got canceled. And so it was so crushing. It was like, my gosh, like this is like, maybe I'm not supposed to be doing this. I didn't really know. But there was this moment where there was like this 1 week where it's really wild when I look back on it, but all these people reached out to me that I hadn't talked to in a long time, that all kind of separately encouraged me to start directing, which I was like, this is wild that all these people think I should be doing this. And the kind of the linchpin of that was my buddy, who owns, it's like the biggest production company in Germany. It's called The Marmalade, and he shoots like all German car commercials and all German beer commercials. He's kind of like the guy in Germany. So he calls me, and I hadn't talked to him in years, and we're just talking, and he's like, dude, you like shooting video? Like, are you, I was like, no, I'm not. He's like, Peter, like, cut it out, man. Like, you need to like stop messing around, like start shooting video. Like, you need to. So that obviously meant a lot to me, having people like that reach out to me that I respected. And literally the next day, I was on a walk with my daughter who was like just over 1 at that time. And there was a guy at the end of my street who anyone in this area will know who he was. His name was Blase McFadden. And he ran this thing called the Bug Shack, which he was like the VW guru of this area. He had more like rare cars and rare parts than anyone. And he was a serious like hoarder. So he had unbelievable amounts of the rarest stuff you could possibly find. And you go over there to buy it from him, and then he'd be like, he wouldn't sell it to you. Like that was like who he was. And he was a very
That's a true
notorious
hoarder.
Yeah.
Yeah. Did any of you guys ever heard this guy?
I've heard
Blaze?
the name. I don't know him.
So he had this reputation of being just like the most like inflammatory individual you could ever imagine. So like he would like fight people and like chase people off his property physically. Like he was kind of like a junkyard dog sort of person. But he was at the end of my street, and I knew his shop was there, and I knew what truck he drove and stuff, but I never met him. I heard all these stories, all these people that like
Scared you, right?
Yes, no, for sure. And so, like I said, one day I'm sitting there and we walk around the block, and my daughter's in front of his shop, and she's like shaking his gate, like at this gate. And I know his car's not there, so I was like, whatever, So she's just hanging out. And he's got all these like old bugs and stuff like rotting on the street, and then suddenly he like flies up like in his truck and just like he's going very fast and like parks and just like jumps out of his car all like animated. And I was like, oh my gosh, like here it goes, and he's like, is this your daughter? And I was like, yeah. He's like, how old is she? And I was like, oh, she's like, I don't know, 14 months. Or he's like, she's so cute. And I was like, oh, thanks. Cool. And I was like, oh, this is your spot, And 'cause I was playing dumb or whatever. And I was like, yeah, so we started talking about it. And I was like, oh yeah, all my kids like to play on all your like old cars rotting out here, like you're just and which is probably not the best thing for a responsible parent to say because they're all rusty and whatnot. But so we had this discussion, and I was like, oh yeah, she loves like this old like Porsche that's sitting out here or whatever. And he's like, well, do you think she'd like the cars inside? And I was like, yeah, I guess. I mean, she's a baby, but sure, And so he's like, oh, come on in. So he like goes and locks his gate, and he opens the door to his spot. And like, it took my breath away. It was this unbelievable museum that he had set up in there, like this like shrine to like automotive culture.
Wow.
And I mean, it was unbelievably curated, so beautiful. Like even the way it was lit, the way like everything about it. It was probably 4,000, maybe 5,000 square foot shop with like, 20 some foot ceilings, and not an inch of the spot was showing. There was like every sign you could imagine.
Wow.
There was hundreds of like oil cans, like the huge ones. There was, he had, I don't know, I think 16 or 17 cars in there, many of them famous race cars in the VW world, and all these crazy things. And so, mind you, this is the day after, people told me I should be a director and all these sorts of things. And we talked for like an hour, and I'm like trying to leave because my daughter's all like, she's 1, so she doesn't really want to hang out there. And so at the end of this conversation, he finally asked me, so what do you do? And I was like, oh, I'm a photographer. He's like, well, do you do video? And like I said, this whole thing was in my mind. I was like, yes, I do video. So that's what I said to him. And he's like, oh, okay, well, I have the world's rarest VW back here. And he's like, you want to see it? And I was like, oh, okay. So he takes me into this room that he had built off the edge of his spot that was just shoved, all these cars shoved in here. And sure enough, there's this bug. It's a 56 oval window. And then he goes on to tell me this story of it's called the Inch Pincher, which was the fastest car of the 60s. It had the quarter-mile record and also top speed record. But like, beating Cobras, beating every single muscle car that you could imagine. This car beat all of them. And there's this moment in 1969 where the car disappears. And to this day, no one knows where the car is. And he's like, and this is the car. And I was like, what? Like, and he tells me all this stuff, and I was just like, this is wild. He's like, do you want to tell the story? Do you want to tell people? Do you want to tell the world my story? And I was like, sure. I didn't really know what to say. And so anyway, I left and I went home that night and Googled everything, and I couldn't believe, like verbatim, he was right on all of these wild things about this car. People don't know the car is sitting in Ventura. Like no one knows that part of it. But I was like, wow. So literally that night I spent like $5,000 or $6,000 and bought a camera setup just to tell his story.
Jeez.
And then I jumped into shooting. So I shot him for 2.5 years. And then got into directing. I ended up shooting I directed commercials. I got to shoot for Porsche and for Mobile One and for all these other cool companies. I shot a bunch of stuff for SEMA and all these. So I was like this period, and I became a certified drone pilot. Started chasing, on dry lake beds, chasing race cars, and so that was kind of how I jumped into that world. And the really sad part to that story is he took his life last year, which is a horrible thing. And I guess I should just say he actually ended up being one of like the sweetest men I'd ever got to know. And he was a very misunderstood person that lived with insane chronic pain that nobody knew about. And so like, not like I have anything like that, but I have back problems or whatever. And I know that if I'm in pain, it's very difficult to be, it's hard. And so he was constantly in like a level of pain that most people would crush people. And so you start putting together the way he would act, and people would come there, and and he'd spend his life, all of his money, all of his stuff collecting these parts. So people would show up there, and if he felt like he was disrespected at all, and he doesn't feel good, so it's like you put it all together, it's like he wasn't actually a bad guy. He just had he was dealt some he probably made some bad choices in his life or whatever, but he actually ended up being an amazing person. I became good friends with him. So last year, when he passed, I basically reached out to his family, who had never met me, and said, "Hey, can I help you?" And I dropped all work for 6 months and liquidated his entire collection for 6 months of last year, and sold. We sold 16 cars, and we sold. It would have been literally millions of dollars worth of parts on like a retail market, but we had to get rid of it. So we were selling it to resellers and all sorts of things. But it was a wild, like trial by fire sort of thing to kind of just jump into the car community.
Wow.
And, but that introduced me to all these players in this local area because he was so connected. So anyway, that's kind of the long
That's a cool
story.
story.
It is. It's a great story.
And I hope so all this, I have hours and hours of footage on him in all these interviews. And so my dream is eventually somebody to buy this car from the family and restore it. And so I could finish the documentary and tell the whole story through its completion.
Be cool.
So that's like a
There you
dream
go,
of mine.
Dan.
Dan, you want to?
Documentary idea. He's done so many How many documentaries have you done?
I've done a few.
A few.
Anyway, so
He doesn't want to sound old, is what it is.
I didn't mean to like jump on that whole story, but I thought it was a cool thing
No,
to tell.
that's
you.
a
that's a
very
great
cool
story.
story.
Great
That's what we're all about. We're all
That's
about
what
the
we're
car
here.
stories. That's a great way to probably end our show because we're coming to the end here. But I think that's an amazing story, though.
Yeah,
I'm
guys.
glad you told that story.
Well, thank you so much for having me here. It was so fun to meet you guys, and it's just so cool to finally meet these guys. I've been stalking for weeks.
So if anybody wants to reach you,
Yes.
what's the best way for people to reach out and contact you?
Just my website, Peter Kappen, KAPPEN.com.
Perfect.
And you can contact me there.
And your Instagram is Visualize Ventura?
Visualize Ventura. My personal Instagram that I post a lot of my stuff is lens, as in like camera lens, and then my last name Kappen, Lens Kappen.
Lens capping.
Got it.
Like lens cap.
Lens cap.
There you go. There you go. A little play on words.
I lose my lens capping all the time.
That's right. That's right.
Well, we appreciate you walking across the street and
Yes.
coming down and be with us.
Yes.
Thank you
Sure,
for stalking
CJ.
us. My only time I appreciate a stalker.
That's it. Yeah.
There's a first for everything.
I'm glad I waved back when I saw you standing.
Yes, thank
in the
you.
room.
I appreciate that. Thanks for not
If I would have
shunning me.
ignored you, you wouldn't be here.
Exactly. But you wouldn't have got to see the Lusso photographs.
No, that's
So,
right. That's right. No, pleasure. Great to meet you.
Yes.
Thank you for coming in, and
For
we're going
sure.
to stay in touch.
Sounds
we're going to
great.
have you back on the show again.
Sounds good.
With more great stories.
I'd love that.
We're going to take Dan over to the studio
Thanks,
so
guys.
he can
Yeah, Gabe,
salivate.
Dan, come whenever you want.
I will definitely
practically
check it
live
out.
there now,
I will
so
definitely
come
check it
whenever you
out. All right, right on.
All right. So like, follow, subscribe. Go to our website, westofTulsa.com. Fill out the tip line page. Fill it out. Whatever story you got, we want to hear about it. We'll have you here in studio. And what's the other thing? YouTube.
Channel.
There we go. So I think we covered all the bases, did we?
Yeah.
Did I forget anything?
No, I think that's it.
All right. Well, that means we can end the show.
All right.
All right. Thanks for watching. We will see you west of Tulsa.